Welcome everybody to our RESNA certification town hall meeting. I would greatly appreciate, questions, comments, smart remarks, feedback, grilling, whatever it is that we might need to do better. But I want to update you on kind of where we are and what's been going on, and work forward from there. So my name's Julie Piriano. My one hat is I'm the Vice President of Clinical Education, Industry Affairs, and Compliance for Quantum Rehab. And my other full-time volunteer hat is Chair of the Professional Standards Board, which I'm done with my second 6-year term at the end of July. And I'm hoping that I get voted onto the board. So when you get that ballot in the mail and you see my name there, I'd really appreciate it. But moving forward, I want to talk about the Professional Standards Board and what we do, who we are, and what we're charged to do. We're going to talk a little bit about the RESNA certifications and spend a fair amount of time on the complaint process, because I think that that's hugely important. I do want to provide you with a couple of updates with regard to the new ATP exam and the future work for the PSB, and then go ahead and open that up to questions. At the end of the session, I hope you'll be able to identify at least 3 goals of certification, that you'll be able to list 5 or more of the standards of practice, but more importantly, how they might be violated, and be able to explain the complaint process so that when you identify issues as it relates to violations of the standards of practice, not only do you know what to do, but you feel comfortable doing it. So who is the PSB and what do we do? We're not a secret society that, kind of hides behind closed doors, although there are several PSB members in here, so they'll let you know as well. But the PSB is the governing body within RESNA that oversees the certification program. It's comprised of up to 15 members, 2 or 3 of which are consumer members, which is a really important aspect of it. If you adopt the philosophy of nothing about us without us, they're a very valuable part of the Professional Standards Board when we look at this as a governing body. And as you can see from this list, if the font's not too small, I apologize, but the majority of the members hold the ATP certification. It's not a requirement, although the majority of people must have it. But when you look at this, you can see that we practice in a wide array of practice settings. We come from a wide array of backgrounds. We live in a wide array of parts of the US as well as Canada. And so it's pretty diverse, but the organization is diverse. And so as we're looking for new PSB members, we do try to keep this level of diversity. At the end of today, if any of you are interested in throwing your hat in the ring to consider being a member of the Professional Standards Board, please hang out and talk with me. I roll off and several other members roll off on July 31st. And so we will be doing a call for nominations, and it's people that are vested in the industry and moving forward. I always, as a clinician, I had a lot of mentors in my life that pulled me along and taught me a lot of things. And, we're visionaries, we look forward. But I think as an industry, we have this obligation to turn around and say, come on, let me help you, let me show you. And so, as you've been involved for a while, this is one way to be able to contribute to that. So to ensure that the PSB has the greatest possible autonomy within the larger organization in the decision-making necessary to be conducted over the certification services, the PSB activities might include, but aren't limited to, things like setting the eligibility standards for certification as well as renewal, the development of new certification programs, or the termination of existing programs. If they're not working, it doesn't make any sense to keep them. With the approval of the board, we also can market this. We can recruit stakeholders. We can work collaboratively with researchers and things like that as well. We can create the operational policies and procedures for running the organization. And we just got done revising those significantly. The first time I was on the board and we wrote the policies and procedures, they made sense to me. But a lot of years later, the industry has changed and the expectations have changed. The threats and opportunities have changed. And so it was time to, go back and look at it and say, have these kept up to pace with, the changes that we're seeing across the industry and society. And, so updates and things were done. And then we maintain the registry of certified individuals on the database. So let's talk a little bit about RESNA's certification program. The thing that I find interesting is that RESNA undertook the credentialing process in 1992. Same time that NARTS was starting the organization, and a group of people got together and said, we should change things and we should do something to organize this stuff that we do. And so, not mutually exclusive, but in collaboration, working together, creating a certification process. And the first test administration was in October of 1996 with 64 candidates that took the test. And while the organization has grown significantly over the last 31 years, the principles that started it from the very beginning remain strong and intact. So when we start with the foundation of what is certification, we see that professional certification is a voluntary process in which a non-governmental entity, such as RESNA, grants a time-limited recognition and use of a credential to an individual after verifying that he or she has met predetermined criteria or standardized criteria. Why do we have certification? What are its goals? Well, the number one goal, honestly, is to demonstrate a commitment to professionalism. It's to validate an individual's qualifications within a context. To achieve this, we provide a practice-related, knowledge-based requirement against which an individual can be assessed. And it's further exemplified by a commitment to continuation of learning and growing, as well as upholding industry standards that we're all held accountable to. By doing that, we convey a connotation of trust, belief, and confidence, or good moral character. And we adhere to a code of ethics and a standards of practice. The one thing RESNA certification does not do is to delineate the roles or the responsibilities of those that are involved in it. It's a team approach and being respectful of one another and their role within the process. But it's also our obligation within that process to understand where our knowledge and skills may be limited and not overstep those bounds as well. Which is why the original assistive technology practitioner, if you're old enough like me, and the assistive technology supplier designations were combined into one, the assistive technology professional certification in 2008. And Carmen DeGiovane is here, so just ask Carmen if you want to know any more about that, because he was at the helm when that all took place. But the ATP certification recognizes demonstrated competence in analyzing the needs of consumers with disabilities and assisting in the selection of appropriate products and services or technology solutions to meet that consumer's identified needs, as well as providing training in the use of the selected devices. Now, the SMS certification is a specialty certification for clinicians, suppliers, engineers, and other professionals who work in the seating and mobility space. So while the ATP exam is a broad scope exam covering all of the major areas of assistive technology, the requirement to sit for the SMS exam is that you have the ATP first, but you specialize in this particular area of practice. There are, well, we'll talk about this, but that certification is growing as well. Oh, there's Carmen. See, you just missed it. I just did the Ask Carmen. So, you could follow up with him later, but the SMS exam isn't required. And so of the people that took it to date, they're either early adopters or they want to be able to demonstrate to the public that this is their specialty area of practice. And then we have the RET, the Rehabilitation Engineering Technologist, which is for ATPs in good standing that have a 4-year engineering degree from an accredited university who are applying engineering principles to the design, modification, customization, fabrication, etc., of devices. So one of the things that we're thinking about and talking about within the Professional Standards Board and the organization at large is being able to find other avenues that certified individuals might be able to differentiate themselves, might be able to show the public at large their additional knowledge or skills or training or competence. And so there are opportunities that we're starting to examine with regard to certificates or micro-credentials or digital badges. If we look at what that means, and for old people like me, it takes a bit to kind of wrap my head around this whole concept. But for the younger generation, I think it is one of those ways that we may be able to speak their language, if you will. They're looking at things to show others what they've learned, what they know. If you're going to separate me from somebody else, if we both have the ATP, or if we both have ATP and SMS, what sets us apart, right? And so the ability to, if you will, stack hierarchically badges or certificates or micro-credentials and be able to show that. Showing or recognizing other areas of expertise, competence, specialization, knowledge outside of or in addition to, or leading up to sitting for the ATP exam as well. So there's some opportunities on both ends of it. In other words, differentiating AT professionals from one another and the competition. So when I when I was thinking about this, I'm like, well, what are some areas that might be appropriate for this? So I came up with a couple, just off the top of my head. When you think about the work that you do to go to a course on custom seating, right? And you take the course and you get checked out and you get a piece of paper that says you completed the course and you have met the requirements of that particular course, and you are certified, if you will, to do this particular thing. It's a piece of paper that hangs on your wall that nobody knows about. Is there a way that we might be able to take that and utilize it to say, okay, me and, oh, by the way, this is Flat Ellie. She is my granddaughter's Flat Stanley project. She's been with me for a month. So if we're differentiating me and Flat Ellie, for example, and I've taken this course, what I need to be able to show that, right? What about electronic aids to daily living and the things that we're doing with connectivity and smart homes? Who do you call? How do you know who to call, right? If we're looking at home accessibility as part of our global approach to seating and wheel mobility, I think it's ironic that we recommend power wheelchairs for people to move about the environments, and then they can't, they might be able to see who's at the door because they've got a Ring doorbell, right? They might even be able to unlock the door. They can't open the door. They can't go out themselves. So being able to, combine things that we do with other things that we do. And so, when we think about pediatrics, if I've got a child that needs seating and wheeled mobility intervention, how do I know who to call? we're not a jack of all trades, and yet we're kind of a jack of all trades. And so these are ways in which we might be able to, highlight other areas of knowledge, skills, and competence within ourselves. So my first question is, and by the way, I removed the polls because the internet capabilities have been a little spotty. So now it's, not anonymous anymore. Raise your hand. What do you think? Would additional certifications, micro-credentials, or digital badges be something of interest to you? Raise your hand if you think they would. Pretty overwhelming. So what certificates, micro-credentials, or digital badges might be of value? Okay. So something in advance of it where you kind of stack, okay, I don't have this, but I have these certificates that are, maybe framing what you know and what you do, and who from a consumer perspective should call you in your area of practice or your area of the country. Right? Okay. Okay, I like that one. Yep, custom seating, I think, that was the first one that, well, it was alphabetical too, but that was the first one that came to my mind. Okay. Yeah. So those are kind of the things that so when you look at the RESNA database, right, and areas of practice, and you check like 4 things, right? And it's there for the public to see that you might be involved in seating, positioning, and mobility, and AAC, and computer access, and job accommodation, right? But being able to tie that to something substantial that you can hang your hat on might be of even more value than just posting it up on the website to say, yeah, I do these things, right? Well, as you think about this, stop by the RESNA booth. Andrea's at the back of the room here. Stop by and just kind of share your thoughts with her. I think it'd be great. So, while I see the addition of certificates, micro-credentials, digital badges, or that sort of way to further highlight the value of ATP or AT professionals, I should say, the program continues to show growth despite concerns that older ATPs are retiring, which I probably will never do. We know that as of December 31st of 2022, we had 4,410 ATPs in good standing, up almost 12% from 2016. There are 331 ATP SMSs, up 89% from 2016. And we have 40 ATP RETs in good standing. So I feel pretty comfortable. Can we do more? Can we do better? Do we want to encourage younger people to get into this field? Of course we do. But we're not hemorrhaging, and that's the good news. So the use of the ATP credential, what do we mean by in good standing, right? Well, we know that in order to use it, the person has to successfully meet the eligibility requirements, such as the ATP education or the AT education and training, direct in-person work experience, and successfully passing the ATP exam. I didn't go into a lot with regard to the accelerated pathway to ATP, but it's all of that information is available on the website. But I think that was a huge forward move for us because there are a lot of people that are ready to sit for the exam, but it's 3 legs of a stool and you have to have all 3 legs on the ground. Do you have to have the work experience before you're allowed to sit for the exam? And what we determined was no, you don't. You can sit for the exam because you've got the education in the exam, but you may not have the work experience under your belt. So once you've made the commitment to sit for the exam, then there's a further commitment to finish the third leg of the stool, get the work experience, and then you're awarded the certification. And so if you want more information about that, it's on the website under the certification tab right at the top of the site. I think the one question that RESNA gets asked probably most often when constitutes what is direct in-person work experience. It's pretty well defined, right? Direct consumer-related services in AT are defined as those services that are provided, in person. But what we've learned through the pandemic is that in person might be in a virtual format too. And that there are lots of people that have successfully done that. And in certain circumstances, it's absolutely appropriate when your client can't get to you, but through a virtual format with audio and visual capabilities, you can get to them. Does that allow us to serve more people? Does that allow more consumers to have access to professionals that know what they're doing? And I would say absolutely it does. But when we look at what's required to initially sit for the exam, we've got some established criteria as to what that means. And that means, evaluations and assessments and other direct to consumer or student services. And this was a big change that we made a couple of years ago because everybody in the special ed area, said, everything you've got here looks like medical model. And when you reread it, it is, they didn't see themselves as somebody that would be a candidate for ATP. And so being able to broaden that scope and look at student services and the assessments that occur in those sorts of contexts and areas of practice was important. It might include fitting or adjustment or readjustment, modification, and those sorts of things. It might be the implementation and training directly with consumers once they've acquired the technology. But it also might include product design, development, fabrication, and things because you're working with a specific population or you're designing products for specific populations. And again, nothing about us without us. It's important to have that consumer input and feedback. Now, recertification is a little bit different, and the ability to broaden your horizons is there for people that are already certificates. And so, looking at the four things that we just talked about, but now teaching and teaching others, professional development, right? Because once you've acquired the ATP certification, we have an obligation to inform others and take that knowledge and build capacities. And so the ability to do that, so if I'm teaching others who are doing the direct consumer, it's quasi-direct, I guess is what I would call it. Mentoring, managing, and having those that report to you so that they would be responsible, but you're ultimately responsible for their activities. And the ability to do that within the context of use of your ATP certification. Further development of products, reimbursement strategies, managing, consulting, et cetera, are another important way to take the information and broaden the message. Because a lot of even the funding challenges that we see have a direct and sometimes negative impact on consumers' ability to acquire the AT technologies that would be of benefit for them, for use of their identified needs. And so the ability to have an impact on funding sources, government agencies, et cetera, being able to take the knowledge that you have and apply it as it then applies further out. Consulting on and policy development and research. Because how do we get better? How do we make better products? How do we have better systems? How do we have leaner approaches to the acquisition of AT products and services? Well, We have ATPs that are engaged in it and are moving things forward. In addition, every applicant has to submit an affirmation of good moral character with their initial as well as their recertification applications, attesting to the fact that they have not been convicted of, pled guilty to, or no contest to a felony or a misdemeanor or dishonesty, bribery, theft, bad things that you can get arrested for, right? And so being able to go through the good moral character and say, nope, haven't had any of these bad things happen, right? And submit that. But even if there's been a grievous error in judgment, or somebody has to say yes, it doesn't automatically preclude them from ever sitting for or maintaining their ATP certification. Sometimes, you do stupid stuff when you're 18. And, if that follows you the rest of your life, that you will never be able to do this. You will never be able to get it. That's, you've made restitution. And so we're certainly looking at those sorts of things. We're not letting the ne'er-do-wells in, but the reality is that, sometimes you make mistakes and you pay for them, but do you have to pay dearly for them? Or are there better ways to approach this? And so anybody that marks yes on any of those, there's additional information and vetting and things to make sure that at the end of the day, the public is protected, because that's really what we need to do. And then we declare that the information is accurate and true to the best of your knowledge, and you submit it. All right. But the obligation of each and every one of us is to submit accurate information and affirm that we are in good standing with the certification and our moral character. Because when we look at that document, and then we crosswalk that with the Code of Ethics and the Standards of Practice, this is really our rules of the road for engaging in the services that we provide. We just got done revising significantly both the Code of Ethics and the Standards of Practice. We took about 3 months crosswalking the old with what the proposed new was, nuancing it, reading it back through, making sure that it said what we thought it said. We looked at the old 22 standards that were kind of in a haphazard format to try to see if there were any redundancies. Was there any verbiage that wasn't clear? Were there any things that that was missing? How would we clarify it? Because I don't know how many times I was asked the question, well, what's the difference between this one or this one? Especially when somebody was filing a complaint. And you have to say what standard of practice or standards the person was in violation with. And if that's not easily understood by anybody that might be reporting a violation, then that's a problem. And that might be a barrier to reporting of violations. And so we really did a thorough vetting of it. And then that document went to, I will say, people highly engaged in the practice. And we got good feedback and made some modifications. And then we made it available to the public domain for all ATPs to review and comment on. And at the RESNA conference, we presented on it, so we gathered feedback as well. And as a result of that, we quite honestly, we realized that there were still some gaps. And people said, well, what about this? And what about that? And they really had very good ideas, not only because of the words on the page, but because of things that they had seen in their own areas of practice or their own areas of the country in which they practice, that they were like, I wonder if it's okay if John Doe's doing this, right? And if it wasn't spelled out, then it's hard to know whether that practice that somebody's engaging in is or isn't okay. So when we look at the Code of Ethics, on the left is the new one, on the right is what we revised it from. First and foremost, holding paramount the welfare of those served professionally. That didn't change by one word. Practice only in your areas of competence. Maintain confidentiality of privileged and confidential information. Disclose conflicts of interest. So there was a lot of words that didn't really need to be there. Bottom line, this is what you're expected to do. We got rid of a couple of things that really had no bearing and had no place in a code of ethics. While it's important, for example, to seek and deserved and reasonable payment for your services, it's not a code of ethic. That's a business practice. So we kind of removed some of those things. We felt it was important not only to comply with the laws, but to know and comply with the laws, regulations, etc., and act in a manner that positively reflects upon the profession. When we look at the standards of practice, because the code of ethics governs everybody within RESNA, ATPs and RESNA members that are not ATPs, that have not sat for the exam. The standards of practice really are designed to govern practice of practicing certificates or applicants for certification. The minute that you sign your application and submit it to RESNA, you are bound by the standards of practice. And that's an important thing to know because it's a set of rules, if you will, that govern the actions of certificates and applicants in the provision of all types of assistive technologies across all practice settings and service delivery models. ATPs that are promoting high ethical standards designed to be serviced in a client-centered approach that stresses cooperation, team approach, and follow-up, as well as respect for one another and our roles and responsibilities within that team approach. And if it's outside of our scope of practice, our knowledge, our skills, our competencies, to refer on as appropriate. There's no harm. If you are faced with a pediatric client, they're not small adults. It's a whole different ballgame. And they're better served by somebody that practices, for example, in that area. And then there's the adjudication of violations of those standards of practice. So one of the first things that we did as we shook out the 22 original standards of practice is we broke them down into 4 categories. Well, actually, we broke them down into 3 categories, and then we added a 4th category that was missing entirely, and that was the duties owed to RESNA. So we've got our duties owed to consumers and the public. And again, as you see here, keep paramount the welfare of those served professionally. Not engage in fraud, dishonesty, misrepresentation, criminal activity, shocking, or any forms of conduct that adversely reflects the field of assistive technology or your ability to serve others professionally. Not misrepresent your credentials, your title, your role, your responsibilities in the field of AT. Respect consumers' rights and their responsibilities in the provision of products and services. Not discriminating on the basis of any protected status. Disclose to all stakeholders the role you serve in the provision of AT services and devices that might be provided. If you have a financial interest in the product that you are recommending, it has to be disclosed. As a person that works for a manufacturer, I have to disclose that. It would be kind of weird for me to recommend a competitor product, but it's suspect when I would recommend my own. So, it puts me in a kind of a box there, right? I would have to disclose that. If there are professional affiliations, for example, as a PT that worked for a supplier, did I still have my license? Yes. Could I put my hands on people? Yes. Could I do an evaluation? Absolutely. Did my paycheck come from the supplier? It did. And so I can't wear two hats. I have to disclose that, yes, while I am a clinician, my role here is as the technology assessment for the supplier that will be providing the product that would be recommended. So we have to recuse ourselves in certain circumstances so that we don't create conflicts of interest. That's not in the consumer's best interest. But if in the context in which practice is occurring, that has to happen, then we have an obligation to disclose it. Again, informing consumers of their rights and responsibilities and promote their active participation in each phase of the service delivery process. Provide AT recommendations that maximize outcomes and minimize consumer risk. Inform them about device options and funding mechanisms that are available regardless of their financial status. We are mindful of the fact that not everybody has a big cash cow of money over here. Unlimited funding, there are funding constraints, there are things that aren't covered. Does that mean we don't let them know of a product or a feature that might be of benefit to them? If we don't, how do they ever make an informed financial decision? Our obligation is to identify their needs and match technology solutions and have an honest conversation with regard to the funding aspects of it so that they do make the informed financial decision. Seems tragic that we had to put this one in here, but maintain professional boundaries in relationships with consumers and their families and their caregivers, and discourage behavior that might exploit their trust. This is a biggie. Verify consumers' needs by using direct assessment procedures. Engage only in those services that are within your scope of competence, level of education, training, knowledge, skills, recognizing when you have limitations in those areas and recuse yourself. But the other piece of this is if seating and positioning and mobility has always been your wheelhouse, but now you're venturing into some other aspects of AT service delivery. It's important to go into the RESNA database because you have the capability of doing this and update that information, because that is the public facing information about your areas of practice. And like I said, as we look at other ways to demonstrate that with certificates and micro-credentials or digital badges or, those sorts of things, there might be an opportunity to create a system that is easily identifiable by the public as to areas that you do practice in. But right now it's the honor system. Do you want any, here's the fun. In our world, especially in CRT world, you have to have the ATP certification, especially in Medicare land, right? Well, if you've got somebody that practices primarily or only in the AAC space, but they have their ATP, is it okay if they do seating and mobility and make those recommendations? It's not. And so, again, being able to update so that the public and government entities know that this is your area of practice is an important thing. Of course, abiding by the laws and rules and regulations, et cetera, is important as well. Referring consumers to other professionals, including other AT professionals, maybe even somebody that doesn't work for your company. Aren't you better off referring on? I mean, just when you think about it from a liability perspective, you might be better referring on to somebody that has knowledge, skills, and expertise that differs from your own. But if I scratch your back and refer to you, and then you refer to me, now we've kind of created a community of trust within an area of the country that we both practice in together. I think it's important that we work collaboratively with one another. We're all stakeholders in this. We all have a vested interest in this. And we've demonstrated that by taking the test and hanging our hat that says, I do this. We get asked all the time, what's the requirement of the ATP as it relates to that direct in-person and you know, do they have to see the person from start to finish? It's a tricky question. All right, we've got the identified needs. We've got the matching of AT solutions, right? It is the ATP's responsibility for the outcome. It is okay for the ATP to delegate responsibilities to others that are part of their wheelhouse, right? I mean, how did I learn to do? I was given the opportunity in a supervised manner, right? With guidance and a mentor. And then, you know, on my own and reporting back of the outcome, right? The ATP is ultimately responsible for the outcome, but it is acceptable in the circle of trust to delegate, but I'm ultimately responsible. If we had a crystal ball, this one would be easier, but considering not only the current needs of the individual, but the future or potential emerging needs of that individual when we're making recommendations. Again, we should know the person and the disability and the technology solutions well enough to assist that consumer in making informed decisions. Believe it or not, and I hear this all the time, especially on the supplier ATP side of things, you know, that your documentation isn't medical records. You're right, it's not. But it is a legal record of what you did, how you did it, when you did it, what you recommended, what you might not have recommended. Because trust me when I say that if there's an adverse occurrence and you are expected to recall Mrs. Smith 3 years later, she might have been a lovely person. You're never going to remember her or what you did. And so if it's not written, it didn't happen. You're better off having some things that you do in writing. We need to preserve confidentiality and privacy and remove ourselves from practice when there is any reason, whether that's substance abuse or other health-related conditions that might impact our judgment and our ability to assist consumers in matching identified needs with technology solutions. And respecting the rights, knowledge, intellectual property, and skills of our colleagues. When we look at the duties owed to our companies and affiliated entities, we are responsible for advising those that write our check and any other professional entities that may need to know within the realm of AT if there's been disciplinary action by RESNA taken against the ATP. And that was never in writing before. When we look at the duties of owed to RESNA, these are all new because there was no obligation for anybody to report anything to RESNA at any time. And so when we think about it, you know, from ourselves, we have an obligation to report to RESNA if anything adverse occurs, whether that's, like you were convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor or had any, judgment against you, if you've had and been convicted of anything, if you've had your PT license suspended for any reason, right? If there's anything that adversely affects my ability to engage in services as an AT professional. So yes, we fill out the good moral character document every 2 years. That doesn't mean that, 30 days after renewal, I did something stupid, that I just get to wait 2 years and fill it out the next time with a yes somewhere. I have an obligation to report it, but we also have an obligation to police ourselves. And so when you know of something that is occurring, or you believe something is not quite right, there's also an obligation to report or to file a complaint against others and let it be out of your hands. Not making any false or misleading statements or representations as it relates to RESNA in the performance of your duties, or about RESNA in public statements. I can't believe we had to put this in here, but we did. To cooperate fully with RESNA's requests. So if a complaint is filed against you, you can't just disregard it. You have an obligation to follow up. Well, part of that obligation actually is making sure that your information on the RESNA database is accurate. Because if you left company A to go to work for company B and you don't change that information, and now RESNA is trying to contact you at this email address that now bounces back is undeliverable, that's a problem. You have the capability of managing your information on the database, and it's a responsibility to do so. So my next question is, are you aware of any AT professionals in your area that may be in violation of one or more of these standards? See, this is where anonymous would have been good, because I'm thinking that I would have had some yeses here. And none of you are going to go, I do, you do? No. Well, we'll go through the complaint process. Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing to stop it, but RESNA does have an obligation to protect ATPs. I mean, you could, you know, there's a vetting process that occurs. Well, the first part of the complaint process is that the person filing the complaint has to have direct knowledge of the violation. It can't be hearsay. And any frivolous things like that oftentimes are pretty evident that they're hearsay, right? So in your own head, if you're thinking of somebody, you're like, yep. Then my real question is, have you filed a complaint? As we know, another one of the responsibilities of the PSB is to serve as the final decision-making body in the adjudication of complaints, appeals, and disciplinary action. And so when we look at the complaint process and our obligation as ATPs, it is our responsibility to abide on our own the code of ethics and the standards of practice, but it is also our responsibility to police one another. And so, you know, frivolous isn't okay. But at the same time, letting things continue also isn't okay. That does not protect the public. That does not protect consumers. And so, you know, I hear all the time, trust me, I do, you know, about things going on. And my first question is, have you filed a complaint? Are you the person with the direct knowledge, right? So filing a complaint is actually pretty easy. It's online. It's an easily submitted form. You know, and so what we're looking for is the formal complaint by somebody with direct knowledge of the situation. It's filed electronically so that all the information is right there, and we're not dealing with pieces of paper that you have to try to match up. I guess the first thing that I would suggest when filing a complaint is verifying that the alleged violator is in fact a RESNA ATP. Because unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do about ne'er-do-wells that don't have the certification. And that's problematic. Now, one of the things that we look for too, especially, you know, because the majority of complaints, quite honestly, are in the seating and wheeled mobility space. So in collaboration with NARTS, we'll look at, you know, are they also a NARTS registrant, right? So that we'll do our due diligence, we'll go through it, but then once that has come to fruition, we can let NARTS know that a decision has been made with regard to, a particular individual and their ATP certification, because ATP certification is part of being a NARTS registered or CRTS, right? Yeah, so that could be a problem. There's a space that's a fillable box, so you can just ramble on and on and on about providing the detailed information as you know it with regard to the violation. We want to be as specific as possible about the violation, including all relevant dates and information like that. Have to be a little careful of protected health information, but at the end of the day, one of the things, that mitigates false complaints against ATPs from other companies that are trying to, I don't know, want to gain market share, whatever it is typically company A doesn't have the direct knowledge, it's hearsay. But the clinician that's working in that space or the consumer that's been harmed are the better people, because they're the ones with the direct knowledge of the issue. And that's who we would want to encourage to go on the website and fill out as much information as they can. We also have the ability to upload documents or files and send it so that the information is all there in one place. We want you to identify what code of ethics might be in violation of, or what standard of practice they might be in violation of. But to make it easier, the new complaint form actually has them listed there. And because of the revisions that we've gone through, I think they're a lot more easy to understand and identify what in fact would be the complaint. We do ask that you indicate whether you have or have not tried to resolve the issue on your own. Did you report this to any other organization? So just as we would be working in collaboration with NARTS, they would be working in collaboration with us as well. But if it's a therapist ATP, did they get reported to their state licensing board, for example? We would want to know that. And do you give the CRC, the Complaint Review Committee, permission to share your identity and the information with the complainant? Sign and date it and submit. Well, that last piece has given a lot of people heartburn. So my question to you guys is, if you could file a complaint to RESNA where you were anonymous to the complainant, would you be more likely to file a complaint? Raise your hand if you would. I'm seeing head shaking. Or would you still not file a complaint, even if you could be anonymous? I only see a couple of head shaking. So is this not something that would be beneficial? Because the person filing the complaint would not be anonymous to RESNA, but they might be anonymous to the person that you're complaining about. And I know in a lot of areas of the country where, there's not a lot of ATP, there's always that fear of retaliation. So this is one of the things that we're looking at considering. And that's why we go through the process that we do. All right. So step one is qualifying the complaint, right? Is all the information submitted on the complaint form? Are the violations listed? Is there sufficient information to determine that it's a valid complaint or not? Or is it a frivolous complaint? Because, if you, like I said, if you're trying to gain market share and you're going to complain about your competitor, how do you really have direct knowledge? There's somebody mutual in the middle that would be the person to have the direct knowledge. So, those are reviewed very differently than, the person that has the direct knowledge. What? Yeah. They did. Right. 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 And we've heard it from clinicians too, right? I have this seating clinic and I'm seeing these people, and, you know, if I don't like what you're doing, but that's why, again, have you tried to resolve it? I mean, you know, ratting somebody out as a first step isn't necessarily the best way to go, right? So once a complaint is qualified, then the complaint review committee conducts an investigation. Certainly the person's complained about is given the opportunity to tell their side of the story. And so all of the evidence is gathered. If that means reaching out to other clinicians, other people in the area that might have knowledge, you know, they're usually named in the complaint, and that information is gathered so that a thorough review of the issue can be done, and an evaluation of the evidence. And then a decision is made. Now, if there's a recommendation to suspend somebody's certification or revoke it, we absolutely consult legal counsel to review everything as well. It needs to be defensible when you're taking those sorts of actions that take away, in some cases, a person's ticket to work. And then we impose sanctions. Now, there is a process when requested. And we've had a couple of instances where it's been appealed, and through the appeal process, then a final decision is made. But, you know, I think this statement is very, very apropos here, and that we do protect ATPs from false claims. That's not okay. And so, you know, it is a valid concern, but at the same time, when you read the information that's submitted, you can oftentimes tell that it's not a qualified complaint. Now, once we make a decision as to what's going to happen, sometimes the complaint has no merit and it's tabled. Sometimes a letter of concern is issued to that particular individual specifically and directly, right? We don't like what you're doing. Here's the complaint, right? But stop it. Or, you know, and in certain circumstances, like, you know, they've created a business card that says they're an ATP when they aren't. You know, that's a stop. No, it's not okay. If they there's a violation that we might put them on probation. Now, if they're on probation, we're watching you, but their name doesn't get removed from the database, we may suspend their certification. We had one person whose certification was suspended for 5 years because there were things that that person had to do over the course of time and continued to do, right? But when it's suspended and you do the things, you're reinstated. If your ATP certification is revoked, you will never, ever, ever get it back, no matter how much you plead. And then there may be some individuals that would be ineligible. So it's difficult to take action against somebody that's not an ATP, but at the same time, if there's, you know, heinous things that are done and then they apply to sit for the exam, thanks for your suggestion, but no. Yeah.
But if you're doing something that you feel is in violation, wouldn't you still want to then file that with RESNA? Because we don't know
if they are practicing in the AT space, that's why I said, you know, I mean, you can go on the database if they're not there, right? But they're practicing in the area. At this, you know, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't let RESNA know that right. One of my last question is, should RESNA consider posting the names of individuals who have had their certification suspended or revoked? That's a question. Okay, that's a valid question that we're also discussing and you know, consulting clearly with legal counsel with regard to the ability to do that. But when we look back at the number of complaints, we can see that it's kind of sort of all over the map in terms of the numbers of complaints that have been filed and adjudicated. I don't think that there was anybody that was particularly in good behavior in 2017, but there was one complaint filed, right? what are our categories of complaints, right? And start thinking about, you know, the people that you work with. One of the most prevalent ones we see is, you know, false advertising, false documentation, false communications, and things like that. And we get some, you know, pictures of people's business cards and letterhead and, you know, email signature lines and that kind of stuff that they're not an ATP. Misuse or misrepresentation of your credentials. We've got a document that talks about the appropriate use of your credentials in formal forms of communication, marketing brochures, and, you know, that kind of stuff. But when we talk about misuse or misrepresentation, scribing has come up a lot, especially as it relates to the supplier ATP, doing the work or writing down the information as dictated by a clinician. And the stance on that is it's not okay to do that because of state licensure laws and practice acts in the states in which therapists practice. When they bill the CPT code for activities that they've done, part of that billing is the documentation that goes with it. Scribing, or, you know, as I'm evaluating, you know, range of motion and calling it out over my shoulder, and I say, Kyle, can you write, you know, 95 degrees down, right? I have to write it down. He doesn't get to write it down.
Verify that if you form
Honor system? I mean, you know, but here's the deal, okay? If it's a digital form, I mean, as an ATP, you know, you're not supposed to do it. As a clinician, you know, I mean, the APTA and the AOTA have both come out and said, not okay, here's why, you know, and we fully support as an organization from the supplier ATP side of things that you're not allowed to do it. You know, there are content areas that would be perfectly acceptable, like the equipment evaluation. You know, if that's all on one form, you know, there are areas that it would be okay for you to complete. And then things that are protected by licensure law and practice act, balance, strength, range of motion, sensation, tone. No, don't touch it. Don't write about it. Leave it alone and say no. You know, and this is where, you know, well, my competitor does it and I know they do it. Well, that's a conversation between you and the clinician to say, stop that. And here's the problem, right? So, you know, when we look at the activities that take place, everybody's trying to get ahead, but we have an obligation to do it in the right way. We've got rules and guidance documents that show us that way. You know, so when we're looking at, you know, criminal offenses and confidentiality, like, oh, you know, John goes from company A to company B and takes company A's files with him, that might be a problem. Cheating during the exam, lack of communication, cooperation, assessment, you know, lots of different areas that complaints can be done. But there are also areas that RESNA can't take action, like employer-employee issues. However, if as an employer, you have let an employee go because of adverse actions by that employee, those adverse actions might be reportable to RESNA. We can't do, you know, like organizationally, RESNA doesn't certify companies or organizations or anything like that. So it's ATP specific. So think about the complaint scenarios that we've talked about and think about whether, you know, you have knowledge about violations that might be reportable. The last thing we do is we design, develop, and maintain the certification. And so the ATP exam, as you probably know, was just updated. We went through the entire process from the job task analysis redefining the blueprint where we took 5 domains and made 4 because the professional practice is incorporated with all of them. We went through the item writing, the item review, the form review, and the new ATP exam went live. We have just completed the standard setting and set the passing score as of, well, today. So be the first to know. So the last piece is that Prometric has to now go back and utilize that and look at each person's exam and determine whether they did or didn't pass. And very shortly, they will be getting their results. I know that there are a lot of people hanging on, when are we going to get those? They've been asked already. Next steps for us are the SMS whole process and going through, which will include new item writing and all of that. So come see me if you want to write items, because it is kind of fun. We're also looking at sometime in the future being able to do remote proctoring of exams. It's done in universities. Can we implement that? We're not going to even consider it till we get done with the SMS part of stuff. But then, as a next step, is that something that would allow more people to take it in a different manner? And then future policy reviews. So thanks. I know I went over by 5. I apologize for that, but